Hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and we've been doing a Bible study at church and we can't do it now. So Jeff asked me if I could go ahead and continue it, and I told him I'd be happy to. So here is our very first social distancing Bible study. We've been going over Genesis. And last time we met, we did Genesis chapter 11. And so I'll be continuing on in Genesis chapter 12. And one of the things I found in the Bible study was that chapter 11 was pretty much man's plan. Uh, it was the Tower of Babel and how man was trying to reach God, by building the tower, and how God put a stop to it. Well, chapter 12 is all about the beginning of God's plan and what He had planned in building His city, New Jerusalem, and how He was. This is the very beginning of how His plan is to save the world. Okay, we're going to start off. This is the call of Abram. This is before he becomes Abraham, and this is also where Abram was not really, he had faith in God, but it wasn't as great as it was later on. And chapter 12 pretty much covers a lot of the mistakes that he made with his faith in God. And so this was pretty interesting to me because, I've always thought that Abraham was, one of the greatest men of faith that was in the Bible. Okay, so if you're following along, you can turn with me to it's chapter 12 in the book of Genesis. We'll start at verse 1. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great." And that's going on into verse 2. It says, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." And then verse 3, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Okay, so there, God's pretty much making a covenant with Abram, and this is like 7 blessings that He is bestowing on Abram. And he's pretty much saying, "I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And you, all families of the earth, shall be blessed." All right. Now the Lord had said to Abram, we know from Acts 7 verses 2 through 4. Let me read that. "And he said, Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken, the God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham, when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Sharan." Okay. So pretty much Acts is saying that this promise was made to Abram before he even left Ur or the Chaldeans. And now that his father was dead and he was compelled to a more complete obedience, God repeated the promise. Abram's partial obedience did not take God's promise away. Instead, it meant the promise was on hold until Abram was ready to do what the Lord said. Abram would certainly become a giant of faith, even being the father of the believing. Yet he did not start there. We see Abram as an example of growing in faith and obedience, and that's pretty much a lot of what chapter 12 covers, is that Abram was growing in his faith. And he's starting this journey with God, and it's showing how his faith is growing. To a land that I will show you. After stating he wanted Abram to leave his country and his relatives, God promised Abram a land specifically that God had picked out and God promised, and that's the land of Canaan, or Israel. These are God's promise. Notice how often God says, "I will," in these verses. It is all about the plans. Like I said before, chapter 11 was all about the plans of man, and chapter 12 is all about the plans of God. God said, "I will make you a great nation." He promised to make a nation from Abram, and he will have enough children and grandchildren and further descendants to populate a nation. And he also promised to make Abram's name great. God promised to bless Abram and to make his name great. There is probably no more honored name in the history of the name Abram, who is honored by Jews, Muslims, and Christians throughout the world. He also says, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you." God also promised he would bless those who bless you and to curse him who curses you. This remains true even today, and is a root reason for the decline and death of many empires. When the Greeks overran Palestine and desecrated the altar in the Jewish temple, they were soon conquered by Rome. When Rome killed Paul and many others and destroyed Jerusalem under Titus, Rome soon fell. Spain was reduced to a fifth-rate nation after the Inquisition against the Jews. Poland fell after the pogroms. Hitler's Germany went down, and we know what happened to Hitler, in Germany after they persecuted the Jews. And Britain also lost her great empire when she broke faith with Israel. This is also the reason why the United States has been so blessed. The United States was one of the first modern nations to grant full citizenship and protection to the Jewish people. This promise has also affected the church. The times when the church took upon itself the persecution of the Jewish people, they were dark times, and not only for the Jews but also for the church. And then God goes on to say, "In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Not only was Abram promised blessings, but God also promised to make him a blessing, even to the point where all the families of the earth would be blessed in Abram. And we all know that Jesus Christ come out of Abram and Sarah's line, so that was the future promise of the blessing that the entire world will get. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Now we're getting into Abram leaving. So Abram went, this is verse 4. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. Now, one of the things I found interesting about this was that Abram was obedient to God by going, but he was only half obedient, because Lot went with him, and the Lord had commanded him to leave his families behind, and to go to where God wanted him to. But Lot tagged along with him, so that was kind of half of a, or it was partial obedience, I guess you'd call it. God commanded him to go out from his kindred, and so he still brought Lot along with him, which was kin to him. So, that was partial obedience. Okay. Verse 5, he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Okay, if you think about it, I read that there was like 300 and some servants and slaves and all this that Abram had, plus all the ones that Lot was pretty rich too. So he had a lot of servants and everything that went with him also. So there's this huge caravan, that packed everything up and went to, because God told them to, and went to discover the land of Canaan. Okay, then so they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites were in the land. That was verse 6. Then verse 7 goes on saying, the land, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar of the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. So Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. Once Abram was in the land, God reminded him of his promises. The land Abram saw belonged to Abram and his descendants. Abram never owned any of this land except for his burial plot. Yet God's promise was enough evidence to assure Abram that he did indeed own the whole country. Abram, and then it says, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Abram thought this was important to do. The altar was important to Abram because it was a place to meet with God, to offer sacrifice for sin, and to show submission to God and to worship God. Christians nowadays have an altar also. We meet with God at our own place where we remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for sin, where we submit to God as living sacrifices, and where we offer the sacrifice of praise. Okay. Now we're going to go on up to verse 10. And this is going to be Abram in Egypt. Okay, and this is where Abram kind of really doesn't really show his faith in God. He comes up with this plan, that God wouldn't approve of. So anyway, it says, verse 10, now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. Abram was not wrong for being concerned about the famine and feeding his family, but Abram was wrong in thinking God would not provide for his needs in the place where God called him to live. After all, God called Abram to Canaan, not to Egypt. So, I mean, that was one of the things. He left the land that God had promised him because there was famine, and so he didn't show a whole lot of faith in God to provide for him. And we've seen miracles where God always provides for his people. So, this was showing that Abram, his faith was growing, the more he served God, but it wasn't quite there yet. And then verse 11 says, as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. Abram, like most of us, found it easier to trust God in the far-off promises than in the right-now needs. When we're tested in this way, we often believe our actions are all right because no harm can come. Though God blessed and protected Abram, even in Egypt, he came away with excess baggage and a rebuke from a pagan king. Harm came. The harm especially shows up later when a slave girl named Hagar, and this is in the next couple of chapters. But Hagar, whom Sarai received when in Egypt, is a source of great trouble to this family. So, I mean, that shows, that, and that's coming on in the next couple of chapters, but, that just pretty much shows that if he would have stayed where God told him to stay, his life would have been a whole lot simpler. And that's the problem with a lot of us nowadays, that we try to do it our own way, and we know God's telling us not to do certain things. We're like, oh, it'll be all right, but we go and do them anyway, and then we end up paying for what we've done when we would have been a whole lot better off if we'd just listened to God and done what he said for us to do. He was sensing potential danger in Egypt, so Abram persuades his wife, Sarai, to lie on his behalf. Let's see here. He's asking her to say that she's his sister. And this, in fact, was a half-truth because Sarai was Abram's half-sister. Yet, in God's eyes, a half-truth is a whole lie. And his intent was clearly to deceive. And he trusted in his deception to protect him instead of trusting in the Lord. If you want to do something wrong, you can find some good reasons to do it. If you can't think of the reasons yourself, the devil is happy to suggest reasons for you. Ideally, Abram would say, God promised me children, and I don't have them yet, therefore I know I'm indestructible until God's promise is fulfilled, because God's promises are always true. So Abram could have said that, and he could have been thinking that, but putting his faith, God promised me I was going to have kids and I was going to be, over a great nation, or I'm going to sire a great nation. And so, until that happens, nothing can happen to me. But, instead he was letting his fears go, that thinking that, these Egyptians were going to kill him and take his wife, if they thought that was his wife. Okay, let's see here. We're on verse 14. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman, and when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. The woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, understanding the place Abram and Sarai have in God's redemption plan. We realize how serious this is. God did not want Sarai's womb to be defiled by a Gentile king, because the Messiah will come from her line of descendants. So this was not God's plan, and Abram was pretty much trying to mess it up by his actions and not trusting in God and doing what God told him to do. So pretty much what happens here is in the next few verses, verse 17. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. "What have you done to me?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. Abram leaves Egypt after being rebuked by a heathen king. God blessed Abram even when he didn't do what he should. God continued to protect Abram. Even when Abram acted like a liar, God did not call back his promise to Abram, because the promise depended on God, not on Abram. Sadly, a pagan king had to rebuke Abram. The king shows Abram if he trusted in God and told the truth, everything would have been all right. But God is in the business of growing Abram into a man of great faith, and this requires circumstances where Abram must trust God. Faith is not a mushroom that grows overnight in damp soil. It is an oak tree that grows for 1,000 years under the blast of the wind and rain. And so that's pretty much what chapter 12 is all about, is Abram's growth in faith, and how he messed up some whenever he first started dealing with God, but he's growing and he's learning and he's becoming a man of great faith. So hope everybody's enjoyed this Bible study, and we're going to start on chapter 13 next, and I'm not sure if which one of the lieutenants are going to be doing that, but just stay tuned, and hope you enjoyed it and look forward to it.